we're going to be listening to you.
Good. Schools. We have with us Phil Keisling, Oregon Secretary of State, State Senator Tom Hartung, and Jean Thorne, the Governor's Education Advisor. Our program today is sponsored by Washington Mutual Savings Bank, the law firm of Miller, Nash, Weiner, Hager, and Carlson, and Kaiser Permanente. We're very grateful for their support. We have a couple of new members with us today. Pavel Goberman, owner of Get Energized, that's with an exclamation point. Here he is. And Mark Goldberg. Mark Goldberg is a former university professor, now a book publicist. Let's welcome the two of them to the City Club. Next week, we get another chance to ride the West Side Light Rail up to the zoo. We're going to have the program there with Executive Zoo Director Tony Vecchio. So you'll want to check your bulletin for the MAX schedule to take a ride up to the zoo for that program. Now, you probably noticed in this week's bulletin there was a membership survey. It's been several years since we've had our last survey at the City Club, and this survey has been put together by the program committee, the membership committee, and other people on the board, as well as the staff. And so we really need your input on our programs, on the location of the programs, and some other things as well. So we'll be looking forward to those responses. I understand that they're coming in quickly, so get yours in as soon as you can. Whoever submits theirs and chooses to identify themselves on their survey enters a drawing for a free lunch on Friday. Our board host today is Nikki Lynch. Nikki is a financial advisor with the Merrill Lynch firm. She'll ask the first question. Now, I know that then of course, after the debate, we'll open it up to City Club members in the audience. And I know that you have many questions dealing with vote by mail and gun control and all sorts of things that you'd like to raise today with our panelists. But let's limit it to education, particularly charter schools. But if you've got other education questions, feel free to ask those as well. Now, before I introduce the panel, I want to mention that we still have our two study committees that are now being formed. One of those deals with charter schools. Now, we've gotten an awful lot of interest among club memberships. We may even have enough volunteers to staff the committee, but we can't ever tell because we haven't completed the conflicts check yet. And as you know, oftentimes the people who are most interested in serving on those committees have a clear conflict. And so we don't yet know if we have enough people, but if you're interested in charter schools and are a club member, please contact the club office. And the same holds true with respect to affordable housing. We might have an extra spot or two on that committee as well. Charter schools, are they a way to promote innovation and creativity in our public schools, or are they just a distraction from what's really important, and that is a way to figure out how to fund our schools? Now, legislation has passed both the House and the Senate, and the negotiations with the governor's office are continuing in an attempt to try to avoid a veto. But because there's few members that are crossing party lines, an override is not likely. So we'll see what happens. Evidently, there are issues remaining over licensing of teachers and regulation of the charter schools. And maybe it'll end up all before us as part of the initiative process. But that's what we'll talk about and learn about today. We're very fortunate to have this distinguished panel with us. Secretary of State Phil Keisling was appointed to his position in 1991. He was elected in 1992 and again re-elected then in 1996. During his tenure, he's worked hard to increase voter turnout and voter registration through Oregon's motor voter registration and through the vote by mail and open primaries. We know he's been a leader in this field. He's one of the state's youngest and brightest stars. Jean Thorne is Governor Kitzhaber's education and workforce policy advisor. She's been in that position for 2 years. Previously, she served the governor as education reform team leader, where she led the team charged with assuring successful implementation of the Oregon Education Act for the 21st century. From 1987 until 1995, Ms. Thorne was Oregon's Medicaid director, and before that she held other positions in the state's government as well. State Senator Tom Hartung is a Republican from Cedar Mill. He's a business consultant from Portland. Now, he owned and operated Hartung Meat Company, and he developed Hartung Farms. I never realized that until preparing this. So he's the Hartung behind Hartung Farms. That's a residential community west of Portland. In 1995, he returned to the Oregon Senate after 14 years in private industry. Previously, he had been in either the Oregon House or the Senate during the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and now in the 90s. And at the end of this term, he'll have served in 5 different decades of government service. So he's kind of been coming back and forth from the private sector, and maybe that's what we need to have people who have that experience, recent experience in private industry. He chairs the Senate Education Committee, and he also serves on the Senate Revenue Committee and the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee on Education. He's very experienced in education matters. He chaired the Beaverton School Board and the Oregon State University Foundation. So Phil Keisling is going to moderate the debate today, ask the questions, and he'll take over from here. Phil.
Peter, thank you very much. Although I must say that when I took this assignment, I was promised that vote by mail would not be mentioned at all. I mentioned it twice. I might ask why me. I'm, of course, Chief Elections Officer, and I was glad to be called to moderate this. I spent about 5 years, actually, before becoming Secretary of State as a state legislator and a staff assistant working on issues of education reform. And the charter school debate is one that interests me greatly. And I was reminded of how long-standing some of these issues are just last weekend when I went out to my parents' home in Cedar Hills and Beaverton to clean out the attic and ran across a box of debating cards from 1973 when I was a senior in high school, and the debate question nationally was resolved. The federal government should finance 100% of K through 12 education. The very question certainly dates those cards. We would never even seriously consider that today. But within that debate topic was a very active discussion of issues of tuition tax credits, vouchers, parental choice, and voices from Milton Friedman to Jonathan Kozell that are still heard today on this particular issue. There are, though, of course, variations. Charter schools was not a term of art a quarter century ago, but today is certainly front and center of the 1999 legislative debate. And we appreciate the cooperation of the 1999 legislature in this regard. Many of those on the program committee felt that the issue would have long ago been resolved one way or another by the time this forum took place. But because of a series of moves and many twists and turns, it is very much a live issue even as we speak today. Charter schools in some ways are the Rorschach ink blot of education reform discussions. People see many different things in the issue. For some, charter schools are the skunk works of the education world, an avenue for innovation, for non-traditional thinking and tinkering that can provide new insight and new models and better models to help the school system. On the other hand, some people see it as the stalking horse for larger issues that they very much do not like, a fundamental change in a century or longer contract that has in effect defined how we understand tax dollars and public education, involving such things as locally elected school boards and public schools, looking at allowing dollars to flow to schools that are not run by elected officials, directly or indirectly, and opening the door for broader debates such as vouchers and tuition tax credits. I think one of the reasons passions run so high on this issue is because of some of the changes in American life in the last quarter century and the fact that schools have always meant a lot more than just places where people teach and students learn. Schools are also a basic part of a community. They define our notions of citizenship and democracy, the notions of egalitarianism and equal opportunity that are a hallmark of the American experience, issues of parenthood and the role of the state vis-a-vis parents are very much caught up in schools as well, because as we know, The choice is an important issue and resonates a lot, but of course, kids are not the actors so much as their parents are, and that has always been a big debate in American life as well. But perhaps the biggest change in 26 years is the role of the economy. I think it's safe to say that however strongly we have talked about the importance of education in our future, never before in American life has a quality education been as important in terms of defining one's future path in life. In 1973, when I graduated from high school, despite the exhortations to finish high school, the reality was that many who didn't could still find a decent job in an economy with lumber mills and many other manufacturing sites, and today that is very much different. Oregon comes late to this particular debate, relatively. The first charter school bill in 1995, another in 1997, and now the one today. 34 states have some kind of charter legislation involving over 1,000 schools. In some ways, that's a big advantage. We can learn lessons from other states and see what has worked and what has not worked. I think the debate, though, today in Oregon should recognize the fact, and I know Tom and Jean will explore this even more, that the question is no longer whether to have more choice with education delivery systems, but what kind, how much, and under what circumstances. There's been a revolution in some ways in that same quarter century. In my era, you lived in a neighborhood, and that pretty much defined exactly where you went to school. I remember a bit of a scandal in the 1970s when it was reported in the Oregonian that a family had moved to an apartment in a neighboring district so that their teenage son would have a better football team to play for. Today, Portland's school district is characterized by magnet schools, competition to get into those from people all over districts, high schools, Lincoln Grant in particular are ones that many apply for. Between district transfers are increasingly common. Alternative schools for special education, for dropouts, for hard-to-reach kids. And in many of these iterations, there, of course, are different rules and regulations regarding them, including some of the issues that are front and center today, like teacher licensure. So charter schools, the next step in an acceptable, if not worthy evolution, or a pathway to an unacceptable, perhaps, revolution. Perhaps it depends ultimately on the details. The trade of autonomy for accountability. How much autonomy and what kind of limits are on that. And then how to ensure accountability. How much to do that through results, how much to do that through regulations at the front end, whether they're licensure issues, employer-employee relationships. These are the kind of questions that animate the charter school debate. They are also arguably ultimately questions that will far go beyond this particular debate. Whether the bill passes in the '99 session, whether it ends up being on the ballot later, which is a possibility, an initiative has been filed, I think it's fair to say that those underlying issues of education, of choice, of the role of schools in our democratic society, of that sense of community, will not go away, but indeed only intensify in the years ahead. So with that framework, I would like to now turn it over to Tom Hartung, who was my state senator when those debate cards got up into the attic, and following him will be Jean, and truly a treasure in this state. It's a great delight to introduce my former legislator, Tom Hartung, and Jean Thorne will then follow him. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Phil just gave my speech, but I can change a few nouns and pronouns and get along. I really have a great admiration for Phil. He attended Sunset High School with our daughter, Marcia, who is right there. Marcia, raise your hand. And daughter Libby is here also, wife Beverly, and son Kurt, 3 of our 5 kids. And I want to talk about education, particularly charter schools. My passion is education. Even though I have a degree in Ag Econ from Oregon State, I have always believed in the strength of the public school system. And I want to say at the outset, because of my advocacy of charter schools for 4 years now, some would say, oh, it's just a scheme to privatize the public schools. Not so. I say that one of the reasons that the United States is the last remaining superpower is because of the strength of our public school system. I'm a product of the public school system. My wife, Beverly, and I went to Ockley Green Grade School, Oregon State University, and our 5 kids have gone to public grade schools and to public higher ed. And it's as simple as this. We must make our public school systems work better. I'm not one that says it's a failed system. I say that it can work better, and that's where charter schools come in. Charter schools give us an opportunity to use innovation and to improve the delivery of education as we know it today. It's not going to replace the traditional education, and the particular bill that the Oregon State Legislature has, Senate Bill 100, which passed the Senate and the House, and the Senate concurred in the House amendments. Senate President Brady Adams has that on his desk, and will sign it when we get over from the House, a House Bill 3240, which addresses the licensing portion of charter schools. And we promised the governor, I promised the governor that we would hold Senate Bill 100 until it came over. And I don't want the governor to veto this bill for a lot of reasons. Number one, I know he is better than an individual, a person who would veto charter schools. We have not talked about the 2 V words very much, veto and vouchers. And I know John Kitzhaber, served with him in the Senate, and he wants to sign a correct charter school bill. So I feel confident that we're going to be able to deliver that kind of bill to him for his signature, and it's truly a great pleasure working with Gene Thorne. We meet daily, virtually now, and with Chairman Ron Sinceri of the House Education Committee, and we are so close, it would be a shame to lose this bill, to have it vetoed. One of the main reasons that do not want to lose it is because there is federal funding, federal grants available. The window of opportunity to apply for those grants closes June 1st. It takes about 3 weeks to put together a grant application. And so if this bill is vetoed, it will go on the ballot. The bill on the ballot, or the initiative on the ballot, will not be as good a law as Senate Bill 100. But the tragedy of it all is we lose 2 years in implementing charter schools. And charter schools, I wish I had 2 hours to tell you about them. Like I told Beverly, I said, wow, how am I going to say in 10 minutes, what it takes me 2 hours in Senate education to say virtually every day. And so just we'll have questions and be able to elaborate on it a little more. And I'm going to make my case, try to make my case with you for charter schools by telling you about the Portland public school system. In my Senate district, I have 3 large school districts. Portland with 54,000 students, 10% of the total of the state. Beaverton with 32,000 students, and Hillsborough with 18,000 students. The first, third, and fifth largest K-12 districts in the state. And I know a lot about school districts. Spent 4 years. We're now down to 198 school districts, and every one of them have special needs. But what I want to do with my rest of my 5 minutes is to demonstrate to you why charter schools are so important, and why whatever we have as a charter school law, it must be teacher driven. This week is Teacher Appreciation Week, and so I want to show you what one person can do, and what wonderful work she has done, and what additional good things she can do if we have a public charter school law. We'll get into it later, but we're not doing this so that we can receive federal grants. That would be the wrong reason. However, as long as the federal government chooses to take our money back to Washington and send it back to us, we want to be very aggressive in applying for those grants. The president in the last 2 State of the Union messages has said, I have $60 billion. I want to hire 100,000 new teachers. I want charter schools. I want voucher, and on and on. So we want to take advantage of that type of funding, which dispels the idea that the charter school laws would take away from the funding of our traditional schools. Simply would not. But at any rate, Leila Roberts, principal at Jefferson High School, been there, 2nd year. Previous to that, she was principal at Ball Elementary and did a fantastic job there, had a great reputation. When Beverly and I were at Jefferson High School, 2,500 students, largest high school in the state. We were the strongest in academics and athletics. Today, there's 900 students at Jefferson High School. And 2 years ago, before Leila came, there was an average of 30% of the 900 absent each day. Can you imagine 270 to 300 students out of the enrollment absent? Well, anyway, Leila has changed that just in 1 year. And what else she has done, she has a twilight program. Starts at 3:15 and goes to 6 o'clock. And that's basically for tutoring students that need the help. She also has a program that she's contracting with SEI, Self-Enhancement Inc., Tony Hobson, Jefferson High School graduate, where those young people in the Jefferson High School community that would be on the streets or in a dysfunctional home, they can stay at Jefferson High School from 6 to 10 and have food and have an opportunity to have a normal relationship with their peers. So I invite you, if you really want to see what can happen if you have a dedicated teacher like Leila Roberts, come with me to Jefferson High School, 7 o'clock in the morning. She's there every morning at 7, and we'll have to stay till 10 o'clock at night when the Jefferson High School program shuts down. And I say to you, if we had a charter school law, Leila could fund the Twilight program with charter school funds. Right now she's using some Title I funds that should be used elsewhere. And what's most important, all of the feeder schools into Jefferson High School need help. There's some students entering Jefferson High School can't even read at the 5th grade level. And so one of the ideas, one of the opportunities that we have with charter schools is to have public charter schools, Head Start schools. And so that we can work with the children in the elementary schools, and Head Start is just a wonderful program. I begin back to Leila Roberts. When I was discussing with her, I said, Leila, do you think it would be a good idea to try to get Head Start schools funded as public charter schools? She said, oh, Tom, that is great. I said, I'm a Head Start kid, Leila is, and my mother was a Head Start teacher. They do wonderful things. And she said, Portland Public Schools has a good pre-K program. She had a pre-K program at Ball that was 100% funded, and now it's only 50% funded. So there's great opportunity out there to take care of our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in Head Start before they get into pre-K. So Leila Roberts, thank you very much. Thank you all the teachers. We hear a lot about the teachers are not doing their job. Their job, think of 50 years ago when I went to Ockley Green and Jefferson High School, and I can remember the important teachers there, and we expect so much more of the teachers today that it's just impossible unless we give them some help, which we can through a public charter school. The genius of a public charter school is that you have parents involved, you have interested community members. It restores the community aspect. I say to you, in 5 years, there will be a waiting line of students to go to Jefferson High School. If all of the students who live in the Jefferson High School attendance area attended Jefferson High School, it'd be a school of 2,200. And so what we can do is make it the best in terms of the academics, and we can do it because there's a lot of Leila Roberts out there, and I thank them, and I hope you will go out of your way to thank the teachers that you presently know and that are working. Thank you.
Phil's comments about the bill being over and done with. Actually, I went back and found that the first contact I had about speaking here today was on February 18th, and I remember the Times saying to Tricia, wherever Tricia is, oh, you know, May 7th, the bill will be over and done with by then. And so I accused somebody here today on the program committee of just dragging it out so you'd have something to have us discuss today. I was also promised that they didn't want this to be political, and I said, well, you know, if you have the chair of the Senate committee and someone from the governor's office, I'm afraid it could be political. And but Senator Hartung and I are very civil to each other, so hopefully it won't be. I would like to take a few moments to talk about the governor's position on charter schools and specifically this legislation, and also his hopes for charter schools. I think that it's interesting. People will say, does the governor support charter schools? And the answer is, it depends, because charter schools come in many different forms. I mean, that's part of the idea of charter schools. And the laws that you see around the nation come in many different forms. There are reasons to support charter schools, and some people support charter schools as really being a way to improve on the current education system, to get rid of some of the red tape, to encourage creativity, to encourage innovation and higher student performance. Others may support charter schools because they feel that our public school system has really failed them, their children, and others, that it's a system in disarray, that the public school system may not reflect their own personal values, and that they want to be able to utilize public monies in a way that allows schools to be formed that are more reflective of those values. Likewise, those who oppose the creation of charter schools may have a number of different reasons for that opposition. Some of the concerns that they're going to siphon off money from an already underfunded school system, and this is one that we hear often. Secondly, another concern is that although charter schools may profess accountability, that what they may really become is somehow elitist in nature or discriminatory in nature. Other concerns may be that this is just the first step towards vouchers, of using public monies to support private education. So there are reasons to support the creation of charter schools, but at the same time, there are legitimate concerns that need to be addressed in legislation that's developed to allow them. As you probably know, charter school legislation got caught up in the closing politics of last session, somehow with the transportation bill. And to counter that, Senator Hartung had announced early on that he was going to begin hearings the very first week of session. I think it was the second day. I was the only one in the governor's office who was already exhausted by the end of the first week. But knowing that it was going to be addressed beginning very early on, and knowing the concerns that there were, the governor in that first week issued a set of principles that he thought were important to have charter school legislation in this state. And he also wanted to make sure, a lot of people always say, well, you didn't let us know. Well, we've been letting people know from the very beginning what his concerns were, what the principles were that he felt were important in a charter school law. Generally, his overall position within those principles is that he supports the creation of them if they enhance the public school system, but he's not interested in seeing charter schools basically weaken our current system or siphon money off or divert public funds. He had a list of specific issues he believed needed to be addressed. Let me just go briefly through them and then come back to the one that seems to be remaining. The granting authority, who is it that can actually issue the charter? There have been proposals of having numerous entities. He supported having the locally elected school board be those who would be able to issue the charter, but to also have an appeal to the State Board of Education so that local school boards could not just unilaterally dismiss charter schools. On the issue of teacher certification, he supports licensure of all professional staff, but encouraged the committees to look at the alternative licensure that's available currently through Teacher Standards and Practices Commission, knowing that one of the goals here is to be able to utilize resource people from the community How can that be done? Can it already be done? And if not, then we could frame any further look at teacher certification around that. The issue of collective bargaining, wanted to protect the rights of collective bargaining rights of employees, no conversion of private or religious schools, requiring that the standards and assessments of the Oregon Educational Act be in place. We are requiring that of public schools throughout our state, and for public charter schools, felt that was important as well. Supported equitable procedures and safeguards on student admission to ensure that there wasn't racial or ethnic segregation. Supported maintaining local control over funding, but also establishing a floor of funding that could be then negotiated between the sponsor and the charter that both recognized the issues the charter would deal with, but also recognized the responsibilities that school districts would have to retain. And then lastly, establishing both a minimum number of students to be served in a charter school to assure that there was some assurance of a comprehensive education, and also a maximum number of students or schools during a phase-in period, so we could be looking carefully at evaluating them and do careful implementation. When we first issued these principles, I was asked by legislative members and others, okay, which are the really important ones? And I said, well, they are all important, or we wouldn't have bothered to put them down. We can't say, well, standards and assessments are the most important and everything can go out the window, or pick any other one. So we are now 4 months into the session. The bill, as Senator Hartung mentioned, moved from the Senate to the House, had extensive hearings in the House, a number of changes made there. The House has sent it back to the Senate. Senate has concurred. There have been 80 sets of amendments considered. In fact, I have this stack on my desk of the amendments that have been considered in Senate Bill 100. There is a remaining issue, though, and the governor has indicated that unless this issue is somehow addressed, that he will veto the charter school bill. And that is an issue around teacher certification. Senator Hartung mentioned another bill, House Bill 3240, that deals with licensure. Last Friday, Governor Kitzhaber appeared before the House Education Committee as they were considering 3240 with a proposed set of amendments that he felt would satisfy his concerns around teacher certification to provide both additional flexibility, but also public oversight of those who are teaching in our schools. The committee quickly dismissed his proposal without discussion. I would say he was barely out the door, and it kind of hit him on the behind, I think, as he was going out. But there really was no discussion on those amendments. They moved another set of amendments and moved it out. And that bill is due up on the House floor, I believe, on Monday, and then we'll move to the Senate, to Senator Hartung's committee. So the issue is teacher certification. Why all this fuss? Why all this fuss around teacher certification? Supporters of the bill will note that it does require that 50% of the full-time equivalent professional staff must be licensed. So why should we care about the remaining 50%? I have had people say that's like saying you should be satisfied that 50% of the doctors in a hospital are licensed. I have heard charter school supporters say we want to be able to bring in resource people from the community. And frankly, and that's something we're supportive of. And as the bill moved to the House, in a meeting with Senator Hartung and Representative Sinceri and the governor, we asked the House to take the time to really explore what kind of alternative licensure was available right now through Teacher Standards and Practices Commission. And I, frankly, was surprised. I know a lot more about teacher licensure now than I did before, but I was surprised at the number of alternatives that are available currently. House members provide example after example to the staff from Teacher Standards and Practices. How about someone in this situation, or how about someone in this situation? In every case, the person could be licensed under our current certification. First of all, if they're volunteering in the school or someone else is paying for it, or they're a guest lecturer, they're not even required to be licensed. If they have a professional technical background, but perhaps not in education, the welder that we hear about, after review of the welder's experience, they could be licensed to teach those courses. Those people who might be making a career change and want to move into teaching but don't have the teaching background can receive what's called a transitional license. But at the end of that 3 years, and these are really for full-time teachers, at the end of the 3 years, they are expected to have the kind of coursework that regular teachers would have. And then persons who have a specific expertise to teach a specific course can receive what's called a limited license, and that is renewable without having to go through any additional training. So in every example that was presented to the committee, the Teacher Standards and Practices does have a way for those people to be licensed. So why is it that charter school supporters are so steadfastly committed to saying only 50% of the staff should be licensed? We have not been given any kind of policy rationale for why only 50% of the staff should go through a kind of process of public review and oversight of their qualifications. The interesting thing is that in 1997, the legislature increased the requirements for teachers in the state, requiring additional coursework for beginning teachers, requiring continuing professional development work higher beginning coursework for beginning teachers, and then continuing professional development for continuing teachers. And we hear a lot from various legislators about how we need to hold teachers more accountable. And so we've increased the requirements. We're talking about teacher accountability, but at the same time, we have some of those same legislators who are saying, but we really don't mean it for half of the staff at a public charter school. I have heard charter school supporters say we've met 8.5 of 9 of the governor's principles, so that should be good enough. I guess my concern or my question there would be, would that mean if we met the principle around not having ethnic discrimination, that would be okay, even though we might still have racial discrimination? I don't think so. Supporters of charter school, of public charter schools, do have an opportunity to have the charter school bill signed by the governor, and that is by sending over the House Bill 3240 with the amendments he has suggested, which provide one more avenue for licensure, which really, I believe, deals with any kind of criticism of people not being able to be licensed who they would like to have teach in their charter schools. So I am hopeful that as the bill moves to Senator Hartung's committee, that committee and the Senate will look more closely at this, and that legislative members will support a process of public review and accountability. We are very close. We are very close. And my hopes are that on this last issue, we won't let pure politics get in the way of good policy. Thank you.
The Education Committee provided 6 questions. We'd like to rotate. We'll start with Senator Hartung. Answers maybe in the range of about 2 minutes. The first question goes to Senator Hartung. There are those that say that public charter schools take money away from public schools and that we shouldn't proceed with this legislation until we fully fund our schools. Why do you believe it is important to move forward with this legislation now?
Thank you, Phil. I mentioned in my opening remarks that charter schools, public charter schools, give us the opportunity to utilize other resources, teachers and so forth, interested community members, that doesn't require additional funding. And there isn't a single instance that you can show me in Senate Bill 100 that will take away funding from our traditional funding schools. I was brought to my mind Thursday at the Capitol was homeschool day, and we have a niece and a nephew who have homeschooled their 4 kids. And the homeschool children, and the children in private schools, and the children in parochial schools always test higher with the kind of assessments. So there ought to be something that we can learn from those schools, how they operate, without having to have all of the teachers certified with a piece of paper that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're good teachers. So that's why I say it's important that we have it now.
Okay. To Jean Thorne. Public charter schools are public schools that have a performance contract to achieve certain defined levels of student success, and they risk losing their charters and ability to continue. Doesn't this raise the question whether all public schools should operate in the same framework, succeed or lose their operating licenses, as a way to truly ensure accountability to the public for their dollars that go to education?
I really liked this question because it gives me a chance to talk about what is happening right now, what's under development right now, and then also another proposal that the governor has that piggybacks on that. In fact, the Department of Education was charged 2 years ago with establishing a district effectiveness model and really looking at how do we look at the progress that schools are making, whether schools and the school districts are really providing both the good learning environment and the safe learning environment for students that are necessary. And they're in the process of finalizing that right now. And really what it does, and they're still working out the final piece, but is to be able to, in essence, classify schools as making good progress. Perhaps there might be some exemplary schools. Somebody's suggested calling 4-star schools that are really showcases of what schools can do and are doing in terms of helping students achieve. But they would also be looking at more closely at where are there schools that are in trouble? Where are there schools that don't seem to be making the kind of progress they need to be making? And if, once they've identified those schools, to both offer and or require a certain set of steps beyond that. It may be an offer of technical assistance to that school in a very focused area if there's one area that they're having problems with. It may be a requirement that the school and the district have a technical assistance team come look in and look more closely at how the school is structured, the curriculum, other kinds of things. If there's still no improvement on the part of that school, then you may move into another step, which really potentially mandates an intervention team coming in to outline recommendations. The last step that the Department of Ed has in its proposal right now and its plans would be, if still there's no progress, then there would be an automatic open enrollment so that students could attend schools in other districts. The governor is supportive of this model, but also believes we need to have a couple of additional steps. And so we have amendments being drafted to another bill right now, which also then say at the end, and we hope no schools would ever get to that point, but that perhaps a district would be required to contract out that school or to contract for certain programs. And if the district is unable or unwilling to make those changes, the district would be dissolved and merged into neighboring districts. Now, that's quite a hammer down on the end there, and we would hope the goal here is improvement. The goal is not to penalize schools, but we are in this state moving ahead on accountability measures for all of our public schools.
Okay. Tom, some critics say that public charter schools are the first step to dismantling the public education system as we know it. Talk about how you respond to those whose fears that charter schools simply pave the way to vouchers and situations like that.
Sure, thanks, Phil. That is a fair comment, a fair criticism when you look at some of the charter school laws that are in the 34 states. For instance, the 3 states that have the most charter schools and, for instance, don't require any licensing, any certification of the teachers would be Arizona, California, and Texas. But nothing is really failing down there in terms of creating a better opportunity for the children to learn. They've made some mistakes in our bill. We've benefited from those mistakes, and I continually think about what I said at the outset. Education is important. Education is the most important issue before the legislature for a lot of reasons. Number one, costs about $4.5 billion of our $10 billion budget. But what's most important, if we can expect to have our children to have a healthy, productive life, we must give them a quality education. Phil mentioned 1973, and I was a state senator at that time. Tom McCall was governor that time. In fact, in the 8 years that Tom McCall was governor, I was 4 years in the House and 4 years in the Senate. We did great things in that 8 years. The beach bill, the bottle bill, and Senate Bill 100. This number for the charter school bill is not by accident. I reserve that because I say, if Tom McCall was here today, he would say, we must have charter schools because it opens up opportunity that the traditional schools, they're not failing, but the traditional schools are not doing as well as they should. The other day, in front of my committee on another subject, Bill Korash, superintendent of Lake Oswego Public Schools. I remember it because it was the day that we passed on the floor of the Senate for the first time, and as Gene says, that was a long time ago, about 4 months ago, Senate Bill 100. And I carried the bill, and we had a lot of debate, and at 1 o'clock the Education Committee met, and Bill Korash was there to speak on another issue. Bill Korash was just elected the State Superintendent of the Year. Great individual, great in terms of doing whatever is possible to make the learning opportunity better. And I said, Bill, what about charter schools? Do you support charter schools? And he said, I'm not afraid of charter schools. In fact, I want all of my Lake Oswego schools to be charter schools, and then we will have a charter school district. The principal or the superintendent of the Bethel district in Eugene, that probably have the best alternative schools, public and private, in the state, says also that charter schools open up an opportunity that they don't have through alternative schools. What was the question, Phil?
About vouchers.
No, okay. That's all.
No, but you answered that, Senator Hartung. Thank you.
I actually don't remember.
Gene, the fourth question that the Education Committee provided was this. The public charter school movement, now in 34 states, in many of those states has experienced broad bipartisan support. Indeed, states like Colorado, it was a Democratic governor who led the charge for charter schools. Here it seems more politically polarized, though with some exceptions, Democrats have largely opposed it. And many believe this is due to the influence of teachers' unions. Please outline some areas where you might take exception with some of the union's position on charter school legislation.
First of all, I want to clarify that when we started this bill, it was not just issues from teachers' unions. The School Boards Association had issues. The School Administrators Association had issues. And when you look at the 9 principles that the governor has, many of those weren't from the OEA, from the teachers' unions. They sprang from concerns from other groups. At this point, there are 3, perhaps more than that, where there is some disagreement with the teachers' union. And one of the issues relates to collective bargaining. The bill as it came out of the Senate mandated a separate bargaining unit and also said the fair dismissal law did not apply. And we felt that was a little too specific in terms of allowing choice among employees. The bill as it now stands does allow a choice of employees to bargain or not, but it also, the OEA had really pushed for including collective bargaining laws in the list of what are called unwaivables, that you can't request waivers from it. And the same is true for the fair dismissal law. They wanted to make sure that charter schools could not waive protections for employees who may be going through a dismissal process. Those are 2 issues we had worked to try to deal with, but the governor last week in talking with the House committee said that he was willing to live with the language that was in there. There still is choice among employees, but they may not have the protections of collective bargaining laws. The fair dismissal law, frankly, if a teacher is going to a charter school, knowing that, we felt that they're doing that with full knowledge of that. I would say another area, the proposal that the governor put on the table last week, which would have one more license, a public charter school teaching license, which would be even more flexible than those that are out there now. the teachers union is not terribly pleased with what we did put on the table, but we feel that we're trying to make a good faith effort to deal with whatever the issues may be. I also know beyond that, the OEA did support putting into place the Virginia law, and the Virginia law has a couple of other pieces where, but I don't know how strongly teachers union felt about it. The Virginia law only allowed school boards, local school districts to sponsor with no appeal, and also guaranteed that employees at charter schools would have the same benefits as employees at non-charter schools. Neither one of those is included.
Okay, Gene, thank you. Senator Hartung, one last question to Senator Hartung, and then to Gene Thorne, and then we'll turn questions open to people, members of the City Club. Senator Hartung, Senate Bill 100 requires that public school charters only have 50% of their teachers licensed in the traditional way. I know that's an issue under negotiation now. But speak to the concern that allowing unlicensed teachers will lower the quality of the teaching staff and undermine teacher professionalism, which seems to be one of the hearts of the concern right now.
Right, I addressed that pretty much, and I'll shorten it up so we can get to the questions. And actually, we are interested, of course, in the teachers' attitude towards this. The teachers' union are opposed to it, and they have been traditionally in the 34 states, except the NEA, the National Education Association, has actually sponsored some charter schools. But, you know, I don't choose to trash teachers, and never have. In fact, 2 of our daughters and 1 son-in-law are teachers in the Beaverton School District. And I understand, you know, what's important to the profession. And in fact, in my Senate Education Committee, we have some bills that will enhance the professionalization of teachers, and that has to do with getting our best and brightest young high school students to go to become teachers. And I look, and we had hearings on Head Start. Head Start teachers do not have to be licensed at all. And so in order to squeeze down or to choke the charter school thing by requiring, you know, a certain certificate, we're going to get something. And as Gene Thorne said, we're very, very close, and I'm hopeful we'll get something that does not ruin or eliminate the choice for parents to draw on important resources of other parents and community members to teach in a public charter school.
Thank you. Gene, many say that public education is a monopoly and that school improvement mandates just don't have the effect that we intend. One aspect of the charter school strategy is to introduce more parental choice in a way that is intended to provide more competition within the public school system. Is this appropriate, and why?
This is another one of those. There's no yes or no. It depends. And it's an interesting question in terms of both the choice issue and the competition issue. And I think I would say, well, first of all, in many cases, we do have choice. I think some of Phil was talking about some of the, maybe with Senator Hartung, some of the choices that are available to parents, for instance, in the Portland public school system. But I think choice needs to be also put within a framework, because sometimes a choice for a certain individual has impacts on other individuals, and we need to be careful about that by saying choice rules everything for a certain individual, we're not having an adverse impact on others. I was just looking at a piece here done by Brett Lane from Northwest Regional Education Lab on choice and charter schools, and there were a couple of pieces that I just wanted to highlight on here, both around choice and competition. He says the exercise of choice and competition, it's argued, will lead to increased accountability, increased innovation, increased opportunity to choose, and ultimately gains in achievement levels for all students. The majority of these claims are as yet unfulfilled. And later he said, as he talks about choice, says research demonstrates that many parents, even when given the ability to choose, do not become active or necessarily rational choosers. The ability and desire of a parent to make a choice about their child's school is contingent on a variety of variables, not solely the availability of choices. School choice movements such as charter schools may in fact increase the disparity between the rich and the poor, the non-minority and the minority, if safeguards are not implemented to ensure that all parents become active choosers. So I think that, again, we are talking about the use of public monies for a public school system, and charter schools being part of that system. The issue of choice is an important one, but I think we need to recognize that it does need to be put within a framework of how does that choice impact on other students.
Thank you. The privilege of the first question goes to Nikki Lynch.
Here, I'll share.
Nikki, excuse me a second. Before Nikki's question, we're running a little bit late, and so those of you that need to leave at 1:15, feel free to do so. I think we'll run till 1:25 or 1:30 if we have questions from the floor from City Club members. So for those of you who can stay, you can take advantage of those questions and answers, but feel free to leave at 1:15. I've gotten notes from a couple of people who wanted to make statements. You can make a statement if you're a City Club member. Just get it in 30 seconds with your question, so that we can get as many questions as possible, please. Thank you, Nikki.
I guess my question is for Senator Hartung, and maybe it's just obvious, but it seems to me that I didn't hear answered why charter schools are, would be better, or, I didn't hear the sort of the main reason why we're having, why can't it be done in public schools? If you're giving the example of how Jefferson did innovative things, why can't innovative things be done within the current system?
Well, we had hoped we were moving in that direction with our alternative schools, but alternative schools, either public or private, it's a contract with the district, and they still have regulations and things that hinder the new and innovative ways that students can be taught. And I look at the Head Start students, for instance. Head Start schools are run much different than pre-K, for instance, but it mainly has to do with opportunity and choice to do new and innovative things in the classroom that are not allowed, or there's so much regulation just aren't done in a traditional classroom.
I'm Don Sterling, a City Club member. Well, that remark, and the one that Mrs. Thorne also made about red tape, invites the question, why don't we just eliminate the red tape and the regulations? Why set up a new parallel school system?
Do you want to answer that?
Sure. Thank you, Don. I'd like to do that, but we're talking about why haven't we done some of these things, and I tell you why we haven't done it. The status quo rules. Change is hard. People do not want to make change, and that's why we haven't done it, and so we need to lead by example and show what can be done with a public charter school.
I think one of the things that's interesting is Oregon's had the opportunity over several years we were the first state to have EdFlex waivers, which allow us to waive certain pieces of federal or state law. And one of the things that was interesting is that a number of the first requests that came in for school districts for waivers turned out to be issues that they had been misinterpreting anyway. There were no requirements. And so I think that, certainly what we're trying to do is have our entire public school system be responsive to students. And so I think the hope would be, and this was one of the arguments we heard many times and the committees heard, was if they're so great for one set of students, why shouldn't we allow all schools to not have that red tape? And charter schools may allow us to see what are the kinds of regulations that are really getting in the way of student learning.
Bruce Broussard, member, Jean Thorne brought up the issue in her opening statement in the concern for possibility of promoting race and ethnic segregation through charter schools. As you know, in these times, we're very sensitive to this whole issue of ethnic cleansing, and everyone is aware and very sensitive about that kind of issue. Can you talk to that from the standpoint that this will be, the charter school will promote, if you will, diversity among the schools, among the students? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. We did a lot of work on that in the Senate. Senator Avell Gordley, African-American lady who is on my Senate Education Committee, actually redrafted the language, and it was put in over in the House to meet the exact questions that you do raise there. And in order to more fully explain it, read the language. It's on the internet of the bill. And in addition to that, Dick Meinhardt, raise your hand, please, and Rob Kramer, raise your hand. The two of them have been very active. They probably know more about charter schools, the strengths and the weaknesses, and Jean and I do put together. And if you have specific questions, why, they can tell you what it is. Well, I say now that under Senator Gordley's leadership, there is no opportunity for ethnic cleansing or racial discrimination or anything like that. And I say that because I take Senator Gordley's word for it, and I can get you a more complete statement from the senator if you'd like. I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Busser. Okay. Yeah. I feel about it the same way Senator Gordley feels about it. But I will get you a more complete explanation, because it's very important and very complex. And you know, initially we were concerned, hey, this is the opportunity to develop an elitist private school. Not so. And I'll include that in my statement to you too. If you give me your card so I can mail you an answer later.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Goldberg. I'm a new City Club member. Recently at our Education Committee meeting, a charter school advocate claimed that parents could in fact sue a failed charter school, and that he claimed that this was a good idea. I have two questions related to that. Number one, is this in fact a reality in San Diego?
Portland Public Schools, you know, on anything that you want to, and they are sued regularly. So anyway, a charter school wouldn't be any different.
Matteo Lucio, City Club member, and my question is for either of the panelists. In a democracy, particularly one as diverse as ours, I believe it's very important to have at least some common cultural foundations beyond McDonald's menus and soap operas on TV. The more we move away from public schools, the more we move away from having that common cultural foundation. And could either of you comment on that and the possible dangers of that?
That is a concern, and I think that it's a very careful balance if we're looking towards charter schools, because, and I tried to allude to it when I was talking about choice, that if real choice is, if what we end up with are a group of schools that are basically formed based on the personal values of a group of people without acknowledging other values that there may be, is that a wise use of our public money? And we are talking about public money, so that, I think that provides, it's a little different than saying, you know, you can choose to do this or that. And so I think it is, while acknowledging the cultural aspects of this, I think we need to be careful that we don't end up with elitist schools or whatever you may want to call them, that are so focused on certain cultural issues that in fact what we're doing is losing a broader perspective for students who, when they move into the real world, I think school is real world, but when they move into the real world, the society is more diverse in that, and so it is an issue we need to be careful with.
I just make a quick response to that also. 2 weeks ago, there was $2 million given to 500 students who had applied for a scholarship, basically a voucher system. There were 6,600 applicants. 500 got the scholarships. What about the losers in this case, because it was drawn by lottery? I say that we can provide for the losers the same sort of quality, if we have charter schools, that the 500 students have with their voucher, that they can go to a private or parochial school. In fact, I am contacting the families of those 6,500 losers, find out where they go to school. We're going to make an extra effort to make sure that those elementary districts and all 6,500 applicants were from the Tri-County area. And we can do it, given the opportunity.
Thank you for giving me opportunity to speak up a little bit. My name is Pavel Goberman, new member. If you speakers gave spoke about education, you all gave positive, but you didn't cover negative. What's happened in Colorado? Now all nation ask a question, why? Why? Very simple, no discipline, very bad education, some very bad education. People, students go to school not for study. They many of them go for show up, show their style, and get some harassment from other students. Parents send children not to be harassed, to get education. And have to think about taxpayers and quality of education. We have to think about taxpayers pay too much money, therefore have to improve quality of education and discipline. Have to be uniform. Okay, thank you.
The issue of school discipline, student discipline, is a very difficult one, and I recognize that the school that, my son's a freshman in high school, and his world is very different from the world that I grew up in. And I think that schools are trying hard to try to deal with some of the issues of having a safe environment. And that's an important piece as the Department of Education is assessing schools. It's not just academic achievement, but is it safe? Is it a safe environment for students? And there certainly are improvements that need to be made. Much of what, but in other ways, schools, I think we expect schools to be able to deal with issues that aren't the school's fault. I mean, the schools are getting, in many cases, kids who have come from very dysfunctional families, and it's hard for schools to solve all of those problems. But I know that the issues of school safety and discipline are important to schools, and I think in Oregon, our schools are generally good, but they can be a lot better. But we also have a responsibility to provide the resources that will allow them to be better.
Good. Let's go a few more minutes. So to the extent we can get questions in, please make your questions short.
Hello, I'm Barbara Clark, and before I became a CPA, I used to teach public schools. I was a tenure in Newton, Massachusetts, and I really don't have one good thing to say about the education courses that I had to suffer through in order to teach school. One of the things that I think has not changed is that lecture and testing is one of the least effective ways to educate. And the way they taught us that was by lecture and testing. And so I'm wanting to hear some good news about education courses, that if we're going to be requiring even 50% of people to be licensed, that it really is something meaningful.
And one of the actions, again, of the '97 legislature was to require changes in our teacher preparation programs, and those changes, so there's a redesign program that's been going on, and those changes were effective at the beginning of this year. And I know that, for instance, Western Oregon University basically, I think, quit for 1 quarter taking any applicants and stepped back and said, we need to redesign our teacher preparation program so we are teaching in the way that we expect those future teachers to teach. So it's not just a lecture and test, but it's integrating subjects, it's looking at the application of the information to real world situations, it's team teaching, it's those kinds of things. So the schools, I think we have 17 public and private schools in this state of teacher preparation programs. They're going through those changes now, and the school district people who are doing hiring, I'm hearing from, are starting to see those changes in the new graduates that are coming out.
That's fine. I agree.
My name is Walt Roberts. I'm a City Club member, and I'm just needing to ask a question about the process. I'm very curious about that this bill was introduced early. The governor was invited to make his views known very early. A set of principles came forth. And I'm curious about your observations about, is this a good path for better public policy? Do you think that the charter school bill will be a better bill given that it's been going this way rather than some other ways that it could go? Just observations on that.
Right, just real quickly, I swear by the process that we have at the Oregon State Legislature. I know it's frustrating to you, it's frustrating to me. The rules are 31, 16, and 1, as in the number of votes in the House and the Senate and the governor's veto. And it's all of the important work, the hard work goes on in committee, and I'll tell you, it's an arduous task. But yes, I say that we, as a result, have a very good bill. In fact, Alex Medler who works for the U.S. Department of Education, said, the Oregon bill, uniquely Oregon, is the best law of all the 34 states. But then he went on to say, but what's more important than just a strong law is the implementation. He could show me laws in Massachusetts, Illinois, Colorado. The laws weren't nearly as good as ours, but they're working well because of the implementation. And we are now ready, because of this exercise, to implement to school.
And I would just say, I believe the bill now is much better than the,
Right.
than the one you introduced.
I said it was imperfect.
That's right.
I said it was.
But
I said it was imperfect, but I had to get 16 votes. You see.
That's right. No, I do think it's much better than the previous bill.
Let's take one last question, John, please.
John Leeper, City Club member. I am a wary supporter of charter schools. However, my concern that I haven't heard addressed here concerns the physically and mentally disadvantaged students, and whether or not charter schools would be expected to take their fair share, numbers of them, and the attendant increased cost that results from them.
I believe the way the bill stands now, that the requirements for special education students remain with the school district. The charter school would be expected to address how it could address the needs of those who are special ed students, and when in receiving special ed students into their school, that they would also receive the additional funding that comes with that. But I do believe, I mean, in some cases, for a small school, if you have a severely disabled child, it may be very difficult. And so I believe the way the bill stands is that it remains the responsibility of the school district.
Okay, I think we'll have to call it there. Thank you for participating today. We appreciate you coming up from Salem. We know how busy you are. Thanks for your thoughts. Remember, next week, light rail to the zoo, so we'll see you there. Thank you for coming today.